Good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Koontz. I'm here with Marina Parkin, and we wanted to bring you, as usual, our webinar series. We haven't had one for a little while, so we wanted to kind of bring that back for 2025. So thank you, Marina, for your kind willingness to join me.
Thank you, Joanne. We're back.
We're back.
It's been a little while since we've been on it, and a few years ago when we had to deal with some urgent stuff for our clients, I feel like we're coming up on a couple of other things that are urgent, and this definitely being one of the important topics that I get consistent emails for the past year about what it is and what do I have to do. And I think with a lot of the changes that have happened, and people are getting different emails and different solicitations, as well as Googling around, there's so much confusion on what applies, what they have to do, what they don't have to do, what they're obligated to do, or what they just have to do by choice, that I think this is a good idea for us to, connect and kind of speak the latest truth about what the topic is. I did have one client last week who reached out and said to me, hey, do I have to do this? I have heard nothing about this, and everybody that I asked have heard nothing. So this was probably the only client that I have who said that he has heard nothing. So I'm not sure that there's some people are still living a little bit under the rock, despite
I
of
wish I was under the rock. Unfortunately, I was not. So, what we wanted to
yeah.
talk to you guys today about is the Corporate Transparency Act and the genesis of it, where it's come from, where it's at today. That is a piece of legislation that was enacted by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, also called FinCEN. FinCEN's job inside the government is to really look at money laundering and look how foreign countries are behaving financially in the US. So, with respect to the Corporate Transparency Act, this was a piece of legislation that was passed several years ago and then delayed implementation because of exactly what we're facing, lots of questions and issues with the filing of the beneficial ownership interest report, or the BOIR, which is the document that has to be submitted with as a result of the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act. Now, this thing's had quite a road already, and it's not even been a thing now, but for like a year. So I would submit to you that, what was it, maybe November of 2023, we were all sitting around the table, having been to several continuing education seminars where all of the higher ups were saying, don't worry about it. This is going to be kicked down the can down the road. It's not going to come to fruition. And much like my real estate friends saw with the implementation of TRID, that took a long time, and then it finally went, and then it's a thing. We're seeing the same thing here with the CTA, that enforcement and implementation has been rocky in the beginning. It'll probably level out, and we'll get to a place where everybody can live in peace and know what's going on. So I would liken this to the equivalent of, like, the corporate equivalent of TSA at the airport. Like, patting down the 80-year-old lady is probably not who has the bomb at the airport. Main Street USA owner of a business is probably not who's laundering money and funding terrorism. But this is what they're looking at. I wanted to talk a little bit about why, the background and where this came from. So FinCEN's
Yeah,
been
that's
cracking
that's
down.
important, because I think some of the questions that we are getting from the clients, like you said, is I'm already submitting a lot of this information through various sources. For example, one is a tax return. You've got all my information on the ownership of my company, who we are, etc. The other is the renewal on the Sunbiz. So where I've formed my company, I'm already submitting who the officers of the company is and things like that. So you would think that between the tax return information and the renewal with the division or the department, Florida department, what else is missing? What else can we possibly submit? So I think the why here is important, so that people don't think, well, they can pull this information from other sources. Good luck.
Well, and they can, but that shows us the tax return, to your point, the tax return, the articles on Sunbiz, those show me who the legal owners of the business are. That's who you've reported. Sunbiz is not necessarily an authoritative source, but a suggestion, maybe more than a rule. But those are people we've said own the business. What FinCEN is looking for are beneficial owners. Those are folks who don't turn up on legal ownership, but have some interest, sort of like a tenant would have an interest in a property, but they aren't the legal owner. So, this is kind of the corporate equivalent of that. Who has the right to control the company, make decisions about the company, influence the company from a financial standpoint, or have a benefit, profit sharing, those kinds of things? Who's benefiting from this business operation that I can't see on the tax return or on Sunbiz? So FinCEN as an agency is a Department of Treasury agency. That means it's a sibling to IRS. So they're under the same house of Department of Treasury, but they do different things. The reason that the small businesses are affected, that's probably the biggest question that I got from folks. They would email me throughout the last year and say, hey, this is not me, right? This is just my little business. I'm a realtor. I own rental property. I have a little manufacturing company. This is not me, right? No, you're exactly who they're looking for, because the big companies, financial institutions, banks, Merrill Lynch, those types of brokerages, financial brokerages, insurance companies, they're already regulated by their own respective agencies over banking, over insurance. So they're already looking for outsiders. There's nobody monitoring small businesses. This has unfortunately ended up to be quite costly and time consuming for people in terms of compliance. The real kicker has come with this sort of whiplash that's occurring. Is it legal? Is it not? Is it enforceable? Is it not? So that's kind of what I wanted to address today, is where we are and where it's expected that we're going to go. So like I was saying, back in November of 23, everyone was telling us as practitioners, don't worry about this. It's not going to go into effect. It's supposed to take effect January 1st. There's going to be another kick of the can down the road. And then there wasn't. So January 1st, 2024 came, and everybody was like, so what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? Practitioners wise, lawyers were talking to lawyers, CPAs were talking to CPAs. I'm sure you got talking to from the AICPA in terms of what you're supposed to be doing. So there was a lot of like scuttlebutt in the beginning, and nobody knew who was doing what. So there's lots of places that, lots of firms that said, we're not doing it. We just don't want anything, there's a lot of liability, there's a lot of uncertainty with it, and we just don't want to get involved. Of course, we never backed down from a challenge. So here was us in the very beginning, like trying to navigate the ropes. But nonetheless, so the beneficial ownership interest report is a report that, if you look at it on its face, doesn't look too challenging. It's only a few pages, 4 pages long. But knowing what to do with it is really where the challenge lies. So it's kind of like the old thing, like, the mechanic, like, you got $200 to turn a screw. It's like, no, I knew which screw to turn.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So
because
so
the
law
form
came
itself
into
it's short, but I think the instruction book is literally a book.
It's 56 pages. The small entity compliance guide that the FinCEN put out to help you complete your 4 pages. That right there should tell you this isn't easy. The second you think something's easy, it just shows we don't know a ton about it. But so nonetheless, we started out, we did the filings, everything was going smoothly. And then March of 2024, there was a federal lawsuit filed in Alabama, in a federal district court in Alabama, with the National Small Business Association, where about 60 plaintiffs sued NSSBA and said, hey, we shouldn't have to comply with this Corporate Transparency Act. That ruling was upheld, and that lower district court in Alabama said this is basically unconstitutional. Congress overstepped its bounds. The ownership of business doesn't affect interstate commerce, and therefore it's beyond Congress's power to require this. The problem with that March filing, we got tons of email after that lawsuit ruling was released, and people were like, great, CTA is dead. But it was dead only to those 60 plaintiffs or so that were in that lawsuit, not the whole country. So then people got really reticent in the beginning of last year, like, well, I'm going to wait because maybe this is unconstitutional. Maybe it's not going to happen. And then as the year went on and we started to get to October, people were like, yeah, nobody's done anything about it. We'll probably just go ahead and file. So now it's coming up to the end of the year. Our firm is feverishly sending the clients emails like, you got to get this filed. The deadline is December 31st. And then on December 3rd, we got the first of many changes in course of direction. So on December 3rd, 2024, a federal district court in Texas issued an injunction or agreed that, yeah, the Congress has overstepped their bounds. And that Eastern District Court in Texas said, not only is this injunction applied to the plaintiffs in this case like it did in Alabama, but the plaintiffs were spread so far across the country that they actually enacted that injunction nationwide. So that was the pause button where everybody went, oh, at the end of the year, now you don't have to file. That pause, though, was brief, and it was lifted on December 23rd when FinCEN announced, like, hey, there's revised reporting. We're not going to ask you to report until January 13th because that stay or that injunction was lifted on December 23rd. Now, there was another filing, and on December 26th, put it back on because there were actually two lawsuits that were in play in the Eastern District Court in Texas. So in that second lawsuit, the court issued another injunction. So that's why you saw that sort of whiplash at the holidays, which was tough to keep up with. We were drafting emails to send to, to our clients and interested parties. And by the time we get them circulated, the rules were changing again. So a second court, the same court in a second lawsuit issued the same injunction. So now there's two, one from the 23rd and one from the 26th. Well, now the U.S. Supreme Court has issued a ruling on the first lawsuit to say, hey, we think this injunction should be lifted and that FinCEN is within their power, Congress was in their power to issue this ruling to FinCEN. So on January 7th, we have another injunction that comes. So now we've got two different sets of rules. In the first Eastern District Texas lawsuit, the Supreme Court has said, yes, we can file, but nobody has talked about the second Eastern District Texas lawsuit. So the injunction is still there. So for right now, you're on hold. What matters about all this? Why am I even going through this? This is historical. The reason that this matters is it's certainly a tell that the Supreme Court is tired of this back and forth. This is making what's already cumbersome and onerous on the business owners to comply. All of this is tough to begin with. And then you add to it, am I in or out? And it's exacerbating this absolutely for the business owners. So in terms of what do I do next? That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. You are not legally required as it stands today, February 3rd, to comply and file a beneficial ownership interest report. You're not required. The expectation is at some point you are going to be required. This is expected to come back. So we really want to make sure that you're prepared. My biggest concern is this. When the temporary injunction was lifted on December 23rd, FinCEN only extended the deadline from January 1st to the 13th. So they didn't give us, if that would have stayed and the other lawsuit wasn't out there to squash it again, they didn't give us much time to get our ducks in a row. In terms of being prepared, what does that mean? It means we need to go through that small business entity compliance guide. We need to understand what we're going to put on the report. Many of my clients and I know from some of the clients that I've helped of yours, Marina, so a lot of our clients have said, you know what, go ahead and prepare it and then just hold it. Don't file it yet.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I think with a lot of clients, especially because, like you say, with the first decision, with the lifting of injunction, it's a matter of time. So you obviously see the precedent being set. And if the second injunction gets lifted and we only have a teeny tiny bit of time to do it, then the more prepared you are now, the better off you are, because then you're rushing to get it done. Now you have all these questions and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the deadlines, the different deadlines that exist? Because I know even going back to, when we are required to do it, what's our general deadline? What's the deadline for a new business? What's the deadline for if you have a change in the business? And then finally, what is the deadline for us Floridian businesses that had a hurricane, and do we even get anything for that?
Who knows now where the hurricane extension is going to lie? That's a great distinction. So for all of 2024, the rule was you had 90 days to file, whether it was from the start of your business or a change in your business. Any existing business that was alive prior to January 1 of 24 had until December 31st to comply. Now, I bring that up because 2024 is over, but we're still living in 2024 space with respect to this filing. So we're going to expect a new deadline if this comes back. I should say, I guess, if and when this comes back, we should expect to see a new deadline. And I don't know what that will be, but historically, the existing businesses that were alive prior to 1/1/24 had a long window. They had all year to file. New businesses had 90 days. Starting 1/1/25, the Corporate Transparency Act said any new business only had 30 days to comply. So they were giving you a little bit longer window when this thing was new and people were trying to get their wheels underneath them. I don't know what they're going to give us when we get revised legislation, or if these injunctions just get lifted, the existing legislation will stay in place. And I would expect that FinCEN is going to give us some update, like they said, hey, it's not December, it's not January 1st now, it's January 13th. So I don't know what that's going to look like. That's something we're going to have to stay in tune with. But at some point, if this comes back, going forward, new businesses are going to be 30 days. That's 30 days from the date of formation or 30 days from the date of a substantial change. This is probably the biggest place where you've got concern. People say, oh, the report was easy, I just filled it out. Okay, but unlike a tax return where they meet with you annually and, oh yeah, what was the rule with that? I forgot. Am I supposed to deduct this? There's no requirement to continue to file or to file on an annual basis. The obligation lies at the business owner's feet to know when something has changed that needs to be reported and to do so within 30 days. This is going to be long out of people's minds, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, and you're still subject to those rules and the penalties are stiff. So that's why when we do it, I very much go over everything and people are like, oh, it's just me and my wife. I don't care. This doesn't really apply to me. Maybe it doesn't, but as you look to grow the business or expand your team or sell the business, you have to know what you're up against. Probably the biggest thing that people don't realize is a change in the business is a renewal of your driver's license. We're required to upload identification, be it a passport or a driver's license, for any of the members that are reported. Well, that's going to expire and we have to update that. So that tells me you only have 30 days to upload your renewed driver's license. Who's the police watching this? I don't know yet. We barely know what the rules are going to be, let alone who's going to enforce them. But those are the kind of things. They're small and they're silly, but when you look at the penalties of $591 a day, they could, these penalties can rack up substantially. And there really wasn't any discernment in the rules, like there is in the IRS language, to say this is the penalty when you're doing it on purpose versus by accident. If you make a mistake on your tax return, you're certainly going to get penalties and interest. But if you start Al Capone in the return,
yes,
it's a different story. And that isn't present in the current version of the CTA.
FinCEN's penalties, even on the forms, the tax return forms that they are enforcing, not relating to this, just some
Mhm.
foreign bank account reporting and things like that, have nothing. You can, to get forgiveness of not doing it or not doing it timely, it's just so complicated. And these penalties are not even related to the value or the amount of misstatement or anything like that. It's like a flat dollar amount, and it's absolutely ridiculous because I think they want to portray how serious,
Mhm.
this is. But when you talk about changes, I think what a lot of people are going to miss is that change in ownership that kind of happens within the family, because
Mhm.
sometimes you're going to have an LLC that only the husband owns, and then he decides as part of the estate planning to put the wife in. That would have to be reported, and or you're passing the business on to the kids and you've drawn up the agreement to do that. So I think it's a lot of these changes where, is it substantial change? Maybe in their eyes it's not, because they're still, let's say, filing a joint tax return, husband and wife, but for purposes of the ownership it is a substantial change because now you've got somebody else that owns 50% of the company. Is that right?
Oh, completely. And worse, at least they know when there's an estate planning thing going on that they're making a change.
Mhm.
Worse is not understanding that you have made a change. So
Mhm.
sometimes we see folks who say, you know what, I've got this key man who I couldn't run the business without, and I really want to start including him in more decision making, or I want to incentivize them financially with some bonus payments. All of those things need to be reviewed because there's a fine line on what makes them a beneficial owner, and it's on a case by case basis. When the test is, does your employee have substantial control, and that is several pages of the entity compliance guide, right? There's a whole section on that, so that's not easy. And this is not going to be an issue when you have a husband and wife who own a rental property, but when you've got an operating company and there's a team in place, this can happen by accident where you don't realize that the authority or even maybe the nomenclature that you're using when you elevate that person and you say, well, this is Marina, she's now our COO. Just simply giving you that title, I'm going to have to report you. But the flip side is true. If I give you all the responsibilities of COO and I don't give you the title, you still have substantial control and I still got to report you, even if you're not yet an owner, where I can see it on your tax return or SunBiz. So that is the part where this gets really, really risky, really, really fast.
Yeah, I think that people are definitely not taking that into account. And it may be easier if you're the only owner and you've been the only owner and you don't have any management and you don't have any family and things like that. And yeah, but then for those folks, just get it done. Just do it and get it done. It's easy enough. Don't wait until you're rushing, Christmas shopping. Don't go Christmas shopping on December 30th, 23rd. It's just get it done and be done. And then if you have complexity, you have some time to figure out, what does that mean? What is the substantial ownership and what is a substantial change? And, am I new? And check your driver's license, like you said, for expiration and such.
Well,
Um,
and that's the thing. Changes to the driving license can also be when a woman gets married or divorced and has a name change. So you may not even be at expiration, but now you've changed this, company information. We do have a question about nonprofits and associations. Nonprofits do have some exemption as well. Those will have to be evaluated on a case by case basis. Um, the beneficial ownership interest report for a multi-member LLC is one question. You're not filing a BOI-R for each owner of the company. You're filing it for the company, reporting the owners. So we've got someone asking, well, what if they're not an active member, but they're still an owner? So activity here doesn't matter. You could have what's called a shelf company, which is kind of what they're looking for, those to be abused. It's fine to have them, but they're looking for abuses in shelf companies where you say, look, I've got this LLC sitting around waiting to be used. I don't need it yet. But maybe I'm going to buy a rental property, or I'm going to, sub this in for something in the future. Those still have a requirement. If it existed and it doesn't meet with one of the exceptions where there's other monitoring, you like if it's a large company with more than $5 million in revenue and 20 full-time employees, that's exempt. Insurance companies, financial institutions, banking institutions, those are the exemptions. Public accounting firms, not firms who do public accounting, but like the Big Four, for example. So there's not a separate BOIR for the people that own the company. It is at the company level reporting who the owners are. Okay.
Let's go back to the Florida extension, Joanne. Is there a
Yes.
hurricane thing in place for this filing like it is for the tax return extensions?
So there was a hurricane deadline, and that is now passed. So we don't know what we're going to be dealing with when the newness wears off and we get our new batch of rules, because we don't know. So the folks who were affected by particularly Milton and Helene, also Debbie, they do have extended deadlines, but I don't know that those are really irrelevant at this point until we get new guidance to say, okay, the new deadline is X, and are the hurricane people going to get extended from the hurricane people got extension from December 31st, but are they going to get extension from whatever the new implemented date is? That I don't know. Now, what I can say is I've got loads of clients that we have filed for already, or people who have filed their own. What do they do? Right now, do nothing, right? Like, you have filed, you are what's called voluntarily complying. You don't have to, but you can. And if you have already filed, you can sit tight until we see if the report's going to be changed. So the current 4-page report, if and when it comes back, they could say, you know what, as a part of either the negotiation between Congress and FinCEN, they may say, you know what, we get this is what everybody's complaining about. Maybe we're asking for too much information. So they might pull some of that in and ask for less. They might ask for different information. They may complete a completely new form. If they issue a completely new form, they'll give us guidance and say, if you've already finished, if you've already filed, you're good. Or if you've already filed, you have to do this new form. So we're going to have to stay tuned for what's to come on that. We don't know yet. If you're sitting there and you haven't filed yet, what do? I mean, that's probably why you're here. You can voluntarily comply and file and be done, or you can prepare, have that report ready to go, waiting for us to proverbially push the button when the rules come back, or you can do nothing and wait and see what happens. The downside to doing nothing is if we have a short deadline, you're scrambling. The upside to doing nothing right now is you're not spending any time or money on something that may never come to fruition. The tells at this point do seem to point to there is going to be some implementation of this. We just don't know what. There was a lot of noise in the beginning, how this is overreaching and it's not the government's business and they shouldn't be meddling. Much like at the airport, people were mad at first, and now you take your shoes off and pull your laptop out. So the longer this goes on, the more indice there are that it's probably going to stay because people are now getting used to it. Some of my clients
I would
said
suggest that
because
if you've got one of these issues that have been brought up that you're not sure about, what does it mean, the beneficial ownership? I have a manager, or I have a kid, or I have a spouse that's possibly involved, or I'm doing any of the scenarios where you may have to do a little digging and research. Now is the time to do that. Because again, if that comes back and now you've got 2 weeks to file it, then you have to go through the research. So it's almost like if you don't have to file, no, but at least get some research done and say, do I fall into that beneficial ownership situation for these people?
And that's a great point. And I'm going to go back to what you said before, which is for either succession planning or estate planning purposes, I've given 10% of the business to my kid or to my siblings or whatever. Those are frequently not documented legally properly. So people say, oh, well, I already put it in SunBiz. I sold the business to my son and I updated SunBiz. You didn't actually convey that business though. So what happens, and this has happened several times as we've gone through this exercise of preparing to file the BOIR, where we unearth deficient corporate governance documents. And I say, oh, well, legally, dad is still the owner, not the son. So now we've got to have time to go document those transfers properly, because doing it in SunBiz is not it's not enough. It's a start, but it's not the finish. I would liken that in the real estate context that's more familiar. When you say I sold the company and updated SunBiz, that's like signing the contract. We've got to have an assignment of ownership interest. That's like the deed, right? So people all the time say, I sold my house on the day they sign the contract. You don't sell your house until you get paid, right? So it's just language that people use casually, but it's dangerous. We have found people using fictitious names that were not properly registered. So that's one of the things you have to report, and you have to report as it changes. So if your business, as it grows and as time goes on, takes on more fictitious names or DBAs, those have to be uploaded and updated to the CTA registry as well. So when we were doing our due diligence on some of our clients, we would see like, oh, you have 10 DBAs? How many are registered? How many even show up? There's 5 in the Division of Corporations website that you're saying you don't use that are live, and there's 5 you are using that aren't there. So if nothing else, it served as a nice little cleanup that people weren't expecting, to say, oh, I've got to get my corporate documents in order. And that I could do 3 more webinars on corporate documents, but it's, I always joke, Morgan and Morgan for the other people. Like, that's the first thing that's going to come to the table if there is some kind of liability, is what do your documents look like? So not only do we need to have them be accurate for your liability protection in the company to protect you like you're expecting, but in order to file the beneficial ownership interest report accurately, I can't say son is the owner of the company if your legal documentation says dad. Then we're subject to those fines and penalties and $10,000 fines, $591 a day, like, all because your documents are not formalized properly. So that is a big one, is finding those deficiencies and improperly reporting by mistake. And like I said, there's no carve out to the penalties for that.
One, I guess last question that I get often from the clients. I filed, I didn't print anything out. I didn't keep a copy of my PDF. I don't know where the confirmation little number is. How do I know if I filed?
You don't. There is no registry. There's no way to call FinCEN. We have tried this, because where I've seen it on my side is 2 owners of the business, and maybe they're not best of friends at the moment. And they say, I'm Joanne, and I don't know if Marina's filed for our firm or not. Mm-hmm. I don't know either. And I don't really have any way to verify that. That is super important that we keep that confirmation transmission if we do file. FinCEN issues you a number, a submission number, and that takes us back to that report specifically. So it's very important to keep that, because I don't have another way to confirm that you have filed. Sadly, what we've had to tell people is, if you don't know if you filed and you don't want to take the risk of the penalty, then what I suggest is attempting to file again. Mm-hmm. And if you have filed, it will reject your filing. Mm-hmm. It won't give you a pretty, it won't give you a, nice, easy rejection notice like it does with IRS. If you've already filed a tax return with those Social Security numbers, IRS tells you that in plain English. The FinCEN rejection notice is more cryptic than that, but then that's likely what it is that one's already been filed. So
it's not an easy one, as
it's not.
It may look, but
never is.
Yes, thank you. These are excellent points, and as updates come up, we will definitely be back to bring you the latest. But I think this was an excellent kind of overview where everybody stands and address some of these frequent questions that we get often.
Well, thank you for your time. I know tax season is around the corner, so we probably won't see you for a while, but it was wonderful to have you. And for the audience, if anyone has questions or concerns, just reach out and let us know.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, Marina. See you guys soon.